Hey folks, Patrick Francie here, host of my podcast, The Everyday Millionaire, inviting you to listen in on my conversation with my guest today, Shawn Shewchuk. In delivering results to over 11,000 clients, his more than 7,000 media appearances, and numerous accolades, Shawn is considered the go-to for entrepreneurs, for high achievers, and for leaders who are driven to achieve more and collapse timeframes. Shawn has become known as the productivity speaker and the #1 results coach. He founded Change Your Results, Inc., an international coaching and change agency with clients located around the world. And when he's not directly impacting his clients' lives, Shawn hosts the award-winning Results radio broadcast. He is a 2-time best-selling author and was featured in the movie The 1-Minute Success System with Brian Tracy, and produced and appeared in a second production entitled Game Changer. Besides his love of travel and family, he is passionate about empowering transformation with individuals, entrepreneurs, and organizations. Through his speaking, his publications, his articles, and videos, his message has impacted millions. And in this episode, Shawn and I unpack his journey to being a powerful influencer in the lives of many. So listen in, enjoy. Shawn Shewchuk, welcome to the Everyday Millionaire podcast. Thanks so much for joining me, getting caught up a little bit, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Now, Shawn, your bio, the lead into this is kind of short and sweet, covers a lot of ground. You've obviously done a lot. You're an author, you're a coach, you're a business owner, but give us a little bit more depth. If somebody bumps into Shawn and has a little time on their hands and says, Shawn, what do you do? What's your answer?
Oh, that's a loaded question, my friend. I'm not a big fan of this, and I remember this a long time ago where someone said you have to have a 30-minute elevator pitch. I don't really go along that. I'm one of these people, and, I've known you for a few years as well, where, I'm typically the one asking questions. But if someone kind of pushes that point, I usually share with them what I do from, whether it's, coaching or on the publishing side. But, I'm the #1 results coach or something like that, because at the end of the day, nobody really wants to hear what I do or I'm at the best at something, because everyone typically, and this, I always tell the story when I'm speaking from stage, if you ever met a realtor at the elevator, when you're waiting for the elevator to come upstairs to take you down in, whatever office tower, whatever city, and that you strike up a conversation and they say, I'm a realtor. You say, well, I'm thinking about selling my house. And they say, well, you should use me. And if I ask why, they say, well, I'm the best. For example, most boards, depending on the size of your community, has thousands of realtors, licensed realtors. How do you distinguish yourself from that? But, at the end of the day, I over the last few years, I really put a focus and emphasis from a time perspective on my priorities. And one of those priorities is certainly family. So, I invest a great deal of time with my kids and my wife, and take the time to do those things that are important to me, while still being fortunate enough and blessed to operate a business or a couple of businesses where I'm afforded that freedom, both from a time perspective and from a financial perspective.
Now, you're a coach and you do lots of professional development, business kind of coaching. Within that, I know there's some personal development kind of coaching. But give me some, open up that conversation a little bit of where do you enter as a coach? What kind of conversations are you entering, and where's your primary focus, if there is such a thing?
The one thing I don't do, and I guess I'll put this out there because typically the question I'm asked, you didn't ask it, but is, what's your niche? Where do you specialize? Are you a life coach? Are you a business coach? Are you a marketing coach? Are you whatever the different modalities are, which there are literally hundreds, maybe more. And one of the things I look at from a coaching perspective, typically the individuals or entrepreneurs or leaders that engage with me or seek me out are those that have achieved some level of success in their lives already, and they know there's more. They just perhaps can't get past that, the glass ceiling that they can see through. Mm-hmm. And the reality of coaching is not directing someone or dictating to someone or to a team. It's about working hand in hand and side by side with that individual to avoid potholes and collapse timeframes. But it's a holistic approach. If we come at this and say, I'm a business coach, that's great. You can be really good at the fundamentals of business from a very transactional aspect, the processes, the systems, and the procedures, which are all important, granted. The other side of the coin is probably 50% of the time, not because it was something that I ever dreamt I would be doing 35 years ago, but probably 50% of the time is working with individuals on what goes on in the 6 inches between our ears. Mm-hmm. And that came about as a direct result of, when I left university and after I did my master's, and going and working with companies on a consulting standpoint, one of the interesting parts of it was that they shoved me into middle management and said, here's where, you should work. And what I realized is, if you didn't have engagement, burn the binders. You need to be able to relate to people, and they need to relate to you and understand where it is they want to go, and then being able to, reverse engineer that pathway, if you will. What has to happen on a yearly, monthly, weekly, daily, and for guys like me, maybe with a touch of undiagnosed ADHD, what do you have to be doing every hour? How do I become productive? And which is obviously a buzzword that's been around for a few generations, but I think there's a key behind that most people don't understand, whether it's leadership, whether you're a high achiever, whether you're an entrepreneur, whatever that is.
So when you look at, when you're entering into, it's back to your point, right? Because if we talk about a niche, it's very difficult as a coach, especially whether it's, I've been a coach for many, many years, even in the world of real estate, we call it, the how-tos is only one aspect of investing in real estate, as you know. And of course, in business, the know-how of what you're doing in business is only one aspect of it. The other aspect of that is, to your point, is the other aspect that goes on between the 6 inches between your ears. And whether we call that mindset or attitude or whatever it is, understanding what are your blind spots, perhaps what's in your way of busting through that glass ceiling that you spoke of. And as coaches, what's your thoughts on this? Because here's my experience is I believe that the quality of your life is a reflection of the quality of the questions you ask. And sometimes as coaches, our job is to ask the questions. Really, we're not there to tell people what to do or how to do, and we give them guidance. But really, I've always believed that you have the answers. You just need somebody often to ask you the right questions, to get to the questions that need to be answered. What's your thoughts on that, Shawn? Because you're a coach, I'm just kind of wanted to go down that path a little bit.
You know what? I think you're right. I think in probably 90% of the cases, 90% of the opportunities, the privileges I've had to work with incredible people from pretty much all walks of life, they all know where they need to be going. They know and understand what has to happen. But human nature is such, and I know you probably will agree with this in your experience in the last number of years, human nature is such that we find reasons why we shouldn't or can't and justify those reasons. And, I've got a gentleman in British Columbia, speaking of real estate, who wanted to become an investor, young guy, late 20s at the time when him and I met. I spoke at an event, and I had a privilege of working with him for 3 years and on one-on-one coaching, which I don't do very much of anymore, but this was something that he implored me, I guess is the way to put it, to work with him one-on-one. Yeah. And he got to understand very quickly that it was a big investment of time, energy, effort, and some money. And he encountered, like most people that get into something that they want to do, it's hard. And I remember receiving phone calls from this individual saying, "Oh my goodness, Shawn, I this is so incredible. I don't think I can do this." And, deep down in places that most people don't talk about at parties, we all know that we have this incredible amount of potential that is very deep within us. And part of the role of a coach is to help that individual excavate that potential. And I really think that's, this individual, he's done some pretty incredible things. He phoned me in December 31st of this past December. And he said, I'm going to fly to Calgary in January and buy you dinner. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, I just met with my accountant this morning. And I said, oh, he said, yeah. He said, net $1.5 million in my jeans this year. And he said, if it wasn't for you kicking my butt, for lack of better terminology, but that's what he used, he said, I wouldn't be here. And sometimes, coaching is a step beyond the, helping people see their potential, helping them excavate it, walking the hand in hand and side by side to avoid potholes and collapse timeframes. Sometimes it's about saying, hey, listen, you need to go do this. You can, you have the knowledge, you have the experience, you have everything it takes. You're the only one standing in your own way. You need to go do this. And we had some pretty intense, tough conversations. A lot of people would call me blunt or brash sometimes, especially in conversations like this. But, when you have that kind of thing happen and you witness the outcomes, for me, that's a big part why, I've had my own coaches tell me for probably the past 15 years or maybe more that I shouldn't be doing one-on-one anymore. And while they're probably right from an investment of time and a business standpoint, I thrive on it. It drives me. I love working with individuals one-on-one, and he's a prime example of why. And there's lots of stories like that. And there are also people out there, who have this misconception, and you've met them, I'm sure, as well, who they think I'm going to hire Shawn and whoever that high-level coach is, and magically he or she is going to snap their fingers and I'm going to, be successful, whatever the success means to that individual, $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, whatever that means to them. And as we all know, that's not reality. Reality is that, there has to be some kind of a plan in place that you're going to follow, execute on. There's a certain amount of time involved. Now you can collapse those timeframes if you put an emphasis and a focus on what those priorities are, what I like to call high leverage activities. Whereas most people are busy. Time in does not equal results out, because we find reasons and ways to spend time doing something that quote unquote needs to get done, but doesn't necessarily mean it's moving us in the direction of our objective. And I think that's important to note. I've had clients phone me and say, "Hey, Shawn, I put in 18 hours today," especially when we start working together initially. And I say, "Perfect. What happened? What did you accomplish? What did you do today?" And they give me this list of things, this litany of things that are, it's amazing. But they talk about, emptying the waste paper baskets in their office when they have, the $25 million a year company and they've got 30 or 40 staff. And I say, yeah, but that's not a high leverage activity for you to be doing. And they're like, well, somebody's got to do it. And they're right, but not that individual. And so I think it's interesting that, if we start to sit down, and one of the things I have had the privilege to work with so many amazing people on is we together on a collaborative basis make a determination where they're going. What does that destination look like? And I'm a simple guy, grew up in British Columbia and on a farm somewhere down south. So I equate it a little differently than some. Let's take that destination and let's reverse engineer it. Let's figure out what you need to be doing from a monetary standpoint and how that relates to your activities or those high leverage activities. Because when we know what we should be doing, we start to experience results because you create an accountability. And most people aren't accountable because we justify why we should or shouldn't do something or why we didn't do something, and we defer it, down the road, and we keep kicking that can down the road. And all of a sudden, a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 goes by, and we're like, oh my goodness, when I was 30, I wanted to do, or when I was 40, and we look in that rearview mirror. And I think that if you're really serious about achieving something in life, whatever that is, whether it's building strong, powerful, high trust relationships, whether that's your health, whether that's your business, whether it's your marriage, whether it's your children, whatever that is, and maybe it's more than one, you need to have a clear vision of where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there?
Mm-hmm. So you said a lot, and there's a lot of little points of entry that I want to get in there. But, something that I think is important to shine a light on, Shawn, in this conversation is exactly what you said. There's busy work, where people are busy all day long. They're busy. There is also the have an outcome that you're working backwards from to achieve. But even in that, you can put that plan together. But how do you, number one, keep yourself focused and executing on that plan? There's an execution. What I heard you say in there, for example, that good client that had, did a great big, had a high net gain over the course of that year, was that you were driving him to execute against a plan and holding him accountable to that execution. And I think that's it's one thing to have a great mindset and a great attitude. You still have to, at the end of the day, you have to execute, and you still have to execute against a plan. And then how do you measure the results of that execution over the course of a week, a month, a year, whatever that might be? That's what a lot of what I heard you say in there, Shawn. Am I kind of hitting on that point?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting is, my wife, Stephanie, is an Olympic mental performance coach. So she's working always backwards from the podium, right? Whatever medal, that they're working backwards from, always a gold. But, there's always these things in between. And, there's Grand Prix, there's competitions, and we often relate it to athletes because our own background is working with a lot of athletes as well at a high level. But that's exactly what they're doing. Their plan is, they're not just going out and practicing. They're actually going out and moving forward incrementally, working backwards from a plan. It's a big distinction, really, to understand that line.
Most people, and this is interesting, Patrick, most people don't, we talk about this, I said reverse engineering, you said working backward,
Yeah.
This is a very small portion of the population today that even understand what you and I are talking about. And perhaps those watching this and listening to this podcast maybe it's more the norm, but it's a very small percentage of people. If you walk down the street in any major city today and we'll just say North America, and you reference coaching with a stranger, the question you're likely to get is which sport. So, when we start talking about this, I know very well-educated people, and one in particular comes to mind, with a couple of PhDs. And, this incredible individual can't afford to pay attention, never mind his bills. And when him and I started, he hired me, and what I found out down the road is he hired me. This is going back a number of years now. He hired me to disprove what I did. And at the end of the day, he made a commitment to himself. I didn't know this at the time. He shared this 10 years later, that he made a commitment to do whatever I suggested he do. And it worked. And he couldn't fathom it. It just didn't fit into the logic that it was his norm based upon his background, his experience, and his education. And he phoned me 10 years after we finished working together. And he said, well, actually, he phoned the office. And one of the staff said, yeah, this guy wants to buy you a coffee. And I said, okay, who is he? And so they gave me a name. I said, yeah, book a coffee, whatever, find a time in the schedule. And they did. And I walked into the coffee shop, and he was already there. And I sat down and grabbed a coffee. And he said to me, Shawn, I want to thank you. And I said, for what? He said, well, you saved my life and you saved my marriage. And I said, well, thank you. I don't know how I did that, but thank you. And it was a perspective shift, because the road, and he shared this with me very openly, the road he was going down was not a positive one. Now, I didn't know where he was at. I didn't know. And he shared this, that he'd invested a considerable amount of time, energy, and money to work with me. But the premise and the sole objective behind him doing that was to disprove like that, I was scamming. Even we talk about this reverse working backward thing, and this was foreign to him. And when we start talking to people and sharing them, hey, listen, they say, well, I got a goal. I want to do $1 million. And I say, perfect. Why? Have you ever been there before? If you've never done something, yes, the sole purpose of a goal is growth. If you know how to do something, it's not a goal. But the reality of it is, if you've never, and we'll use that number because a lot of people, this is a common thing. You've heard this, I want to do $1 million.
Hence the name of the show, by the way, The Everyday Millionaire.
But $1 million is not as much as it once was.
Sure not.
As we discussed before going on the air.
Yeah.
The other side of the coin is, if you've never done that, if you know how to do it, you've generated 50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever it is, it's old hat. You know how to do it. You can get up and do it for the most part in your sleep. But when we go to something we've never done before, what typically happens is we go, I'm going to do $1 million. And then we keep doing more of the same. Well, more of the same gives you more of the same. If you're going to hit $1 million, you have to do something dramatically different. If last year was 100,000. And, some people say to me, Shawn, I not right now. And then 6 or 8 months later, there'll be at an event where I speak and they'll come up to me and say hi. And I say, hey, how are you doing with that objective, that goal you set, whatever it was 8 months ago? And they say, yeah, well, I'm still thinking about it. And I asked them the question, what are you doing differently today than you were doing, 10 months ago? And they look at me like I'm speaking a different language. The reality of it is, if you're going to do something different, you have to break it down. And this is where a coach comes in. This is where the idea of understanding that we all have an incredible amount of knowledge, skill, education, and experience. And if we bring that to bear, it can change our outcomes. But where it doesn't play in is that we have to break it down. So again, I'm that guy that, farm kid from southern BC, you can eat a whole apple, but you very likely can't eat the whole apple in one bite. So you have to break it down into bite-sized pieces. If you could take that and do that with this, as Jim Collins in the book Good to Great calls, a big, hairy, audacious goal, and we can break it down into something that we can assimilate and understand, then we can start to make that progress and actually see those results. Is there accountability component? Is there, do you have to have someone hold your feet to the fire? Most of us, yes.
Yeah.
Most people are not willing, and here's the key. There's a very small portion of people out there today who are willing to do what it takes to see the results they talk about. And I'll use an example from the publishing side of what I do. In 2018, 2/3 of Americans said they wanted to write a book. On the nonfiction side, in the United States, just under 100,000 books were released in 2018. So it gives you an idea, if you think about the population of the United States, it gives you an idea of the percentage of people, it's irrational, but still there's a huge disparity between those that said yes and those that actually did something with it.
So that's an interesting, so Shawn, let's jump around here a little bit in this conversation because, you're a great speaker, you're an author, and, it's interesting that you talk, I've been asked to write a book on more than one occasion, and I don't want to write a book. That's why I'm doing a podcast. Actually, that I'm looking at technology and I go, no, books get old too fast, and then I'm going to have to rewrite or write another one. No, I'm not interested. So that's my story. But the point is that I've committed to my podcast. It's been 7 years. I love doing it. I love meeting my guests, having these kinds of conversations. You're an author, and I want to talk a little bit about you're talking about a book I think you have just released or are releasing, and this is not your first book. So why don't we talk a little bit about your authorship? And here's what I learned. John DeMartini once shared with me about an author and being an author and writing a book. Well, he was one of the guys that many years ago suggested I write a book, and it was because I was telling him that I was the best at what I do, blah blah blah. He goes, "Have you written a book?" And I go, "No." And he goes, "Well, just always remember, being an author makes you an authority." And that's the whole context behind writing a book. It makes you an author, an authority, hence the word author. And I go, wow, that's kind of cool. I don't know where that fits in with a podcast or this conversation, but that was my lesson around writing a book. So tell me a little bit about your writing and kind of what got you into that world, because those are big commitments.
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliments at the beginning of that. But and I'll echo what Dr. DeMartini said to you. I hope you do reconsider writing a book. I don't know that I agree with the fact that a book gets old. The first book I wrote back in 2009, I think it still sold about 25,000 copies last year in 2021.
Wow.
And I can directly attribute to that well over $1.5 million in business in our company. So, a book is a platform, a launch pad. It is definitely instant credibility. If you have the knowledge skill to write a book and to put that, that knowledge on paper, we live in a world today where that information is assimilated, not necessarily in the traditional sense where someone orders that book online or goes to, Chapters or Barnes and Noble or wherever they buy their books. But that first book is definitely there's thousands of
Sure.
ebook copies.
Yeah.
And people listening to it on Audible and all these kinds of things. I wrote a book back, the first one, Change Your Mind, Change Your Results, which became a bestseller fairly quickly. But I'll share this. The book itself is a tool, and you alluded to this a moment ago.
Yeah.
There are lots of people that I've given away thousands of copies. Thousands of copies have been sold. It still sells. We're probably early next year going to re-release the book with some new information, but it's been a lot of years since it came out. I love the idea of the intellectual property being out there. Certainly none of us are around forever.
Yeah.
And when that book first came out, I received a Facebook message, and it was available on 30,000+ online booksellers around the world at the time, and it hadn't gone into stores yet. It was first month it was released. And I received a message on Facebook from a 16-year-old girl in the UK who said, "Dear Mr. Shewchuk, thank you for writing this book. And I'll abbreviate it was about three paragraphs, but you changed my life." And I honestly sat there. I was in my car at the time, and I had my phone in my hand. I was reading this, and I had tears in my eyes, because the book is far more than a business tool. And it is a business tool, to be clear. It is a credibility tool. It is something that changes the dynamic of your business in ways that if you've never written one, you don't know or understand. But there's a much more personal side to this. And there are literally, I've received thousands of messages since that book came out from people who I've never worked with, who've never worked with our company, who may never work with our company, may never attend an event or anything, who have said, "Thank you. It changed my life." And so I really think there's another aspect to this.
Sure.
And what's in today's world, it's out there forever. Like when you write a book, it's something you can't pull back. We did a movie that I was a big part of back a few years called Game Changer. Matter of fact, for those watching and listening, you go to GameChangerTime.com and watch it for free. And it really explores the whole idea of coaching. Because as we talked about a moment ago, Patrick, a lot of people, it's a small segment of the population that know what we're talking about. Most don't. And this is meant to really kind of open that up and let people know that there is help available. There are people out there and it doesn't necessarily mean it's Shawn. Whether it's from a business standpoint or a personal standpoint or relationships or your marriage and I'm not talking about counseling or a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, future facing. They say counseling is about the past and coaching is about the future. And that's really the focus behind it. And I think if you're open, and this is a big challenge for some of us, in particular men, if you're open to something new and the outcomes that I believe we were all positive outcomes we're deserving of. You'll embrace the idea that you can do that and not do it on your own. Anyone who's been truly successful, success doesn't always represent money, although perhaps it's a big part of it. Anyone that's been truly successful in their life, their business, or career has had a coach. Full stop.
Well, it's interesting because in your earlier, I was going to go back to it. It was one of the other points I wanted to hit on, is that you mentioned that you're a world-class coach. You do a lot of it. You have a business, you have a team, you support people one-on-one, one-on-many, through your books, through your speaking, all the things that you do. I think you've got a radio or / podcast show. Now, the question then, I guess, is around all of that is, you also have a coach. So why do you have a coach? If you're a coach, why do you have a coach?
Great question. I have had at least one, and sometimes more than one at the same time, going back to the 90s, early 90s. My first coach was, and you'll know, and a lot of your listeners will know, Bob Proctor, who passed away last year. And I guess, last year now, early this year, I forget. It was recently. I think it was 87 or 88 years old. And I don't tell the story often, but I'll share it with you because I think we have the time. Young guy, moved from small town BC to Calgary, figured that, I had the world figured out. Got married, bought myself about 20 doors, investment properties. In those days, real estate was a vastly different space than it is today. And I had a good job. And, if we go back over 30 years ago, making $80,000 a year was a pretty significant amount of money. And I went inside of about 3 months from living what I thought was, I'd like by the tail, that sort of mentality, to being literally broke, homeless, and in divorce court. And I was driving through Calgary past where the Greyhound bus depot once was, and it was like somebody hit me with a baseball bat in the side of the head. And I had this aha moment, this epiphany that something had to change, and it had to be dramatic. I didn't know what at that point in time, because I was perhaps not ready for it. I was in the middle of a pity party, and why me? This sort of thing that I've done relatively good by most standards. I was fortunate enough to have a friend of mine who lent me the money to get an apartment. I got a job that was a go nowhere job, and I heard about, and this is before the days where the internet is what it is, and which dates me obviously, but Bob Proctor was coming to Calgary, and he was doing it at the Sheraton Cavalier Hotel in Northeast, and but I phoned his office and I said, "Hey, I hear Bob's coming to Calgary," and I didn't know who he was. This is pre-secret and all these things that happened over the years. And they gave me the dates, times, and I asked how much, and they said $1,500. Well, I grew up in a very conservative, and I don't mean politically conservative, but conservative home. My dad was Ukrainian. His parents went through the Depression. Frugality is probably putting it lightly when it comes to, how I was raised. There had to be holes in the bottom of my soles before I got new shoes. And necessity today means something dramatically different than it does or did then. And I decided, well, I'm not having some guy preach to me for $1,500 for 3 days. But I knew something had to change. So on the Friday evening, I went to the hotel and walked past the reception desk, and the staff were chasing me because I didn't have a name badge on. And he was standing at the front of the ballroom. He was the only one in there, and he was putting stuff away in his briefcase. And I walked up to him, I shook his hand, and I said, "Hi, Bob, my name is Shawn, and I want to have a conversation about you coaching me." Now, for those of you who've heard Bob speak, maybe heard him on video or YouTube or wherever, he's known as one of the very best speakers in the world. And in person, he's a little more blunt, direct, and even brash. And Bob looked at me, didn't acknowledge anything I'd said, pointed at the restaurant down the hall in the lobby of the hotel, and he said, "That restaurant tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., don't be late." And he walked away and left me standing in front of the ballroom. And I was a little bit shocked and taken back, because that's not what I expected, I guess. And the following morning at 7, I was in the lobby in the hotel, and he walked down precisely 7, sat down at the table in the restaurant. There was no one in the restaurant. The server came right over. We ordered, and he ordered a dry toast and eggs. And something struck me while I was sitting there. There was 500 people attending his event, none of which had asked him to breakfast, and he would have gladly gone with any of them. And the food came almost instantly because there was no one in the restaurant at that time in the morning. And he looked at me and he said, "Shawn, I have a question for you." I said, "Yes." And I'm all ears, because I'm sitting with this guy who is, supposed to be the best there is. I don't know him from Adam. And he says, "Shawn, what's the most amount of money you've ever earned in a year?" Now, remember, I come from a background. Money was a taboo topic. You don't talk about it. There was never enough, even there was a little bit. Least of all, you never ask someone what they make. Here's this guy asking, and I looked at Bob Proctor and I said, who the hell do you think you are? And Bob smiled knowingly. He said, Shawn, he says, it doesn't really matter. I probably made more money than you have. I said, yeah, okay, you're probably right. He says, but it tells me two things. It tells me, one, how you see yourself and how you value yourself. And it kind of blew my mind. By this point in time, I'd gone to school, had a little bit of education. I started a couple companies and then, lost everything, had a few, rental properties. And we talked for 45 minutes, and about, probably 7:30 or 7:40, we were done eating. And he said, by the way, pretty soon I'm going to have to get back to the ballroom. And I said, listen, I genuinely appreciate you spending time with me. It's been fantastic. My head's going 90 miles an hour or faster. I've never been exposed to this kind of thing before. And he says, are you still interested in coaching with me? And I said, yes. Do you have a business card? He said, no, I don't carry cards. And if you knew Bob at all, he never carried business cards. And he reached in his suit jacket and he pulled out a scrap piece of paper, wrote his assistant's phone number and name, and passed it across the table to me. He said, call her. She'll take care of the details. And I said, all right. And I still had plans to do this. And so it's probably 10 to 8 by now. And he says to me, Shawn, I've got to get back to the ballroom. He says, by the way, you never asked me what the investment is for coaching. I said, yeah, you're right. And we kept talking. So now it's like 4 minutes to or something. And he gets up and I shake his hand and I sit back down and he turns around. And as he turns around, he turns his head and he throws over his shoulder at me. He's like, oh, by the way, Shawn, it's $90,000 to work with me for 6 months. I probably didn't have $90 in my bank account at this point in time. And I remember paying the breakfast, the bill for breakfast, and that hurt me, which probably wasn't very much money. And I was in shock. Honestly, I don't really remember the drive home. I remember walking to my car, and in those days, my cell phone wasn't quite as smart as the ones we have today. And I sat there and dialed this phone number. And if you recall the days where we had free weekends, and I thought, oh, well, you know what? It's a weekend. She's not going to answer because it's Saturday morning. And I have free calling. So I dialed this Toronto phone number. And I sat there for 35 or 45 minutes with my finger over that send button because in my mind, it was making a commitment. And I didn't know where the money was coming from. But I did. It took me, like I said, probably the better part of an hour to make that call. I left her voicemail Monday. She called me back and we took care of the paperwork. And in those days on a fax machine. But now I had to come up with the money, and that first year certainly saw me eating some, day old bread and a lot of craft dinner. But I wouldn't be today where I am in life, and I wouldn't have had the privileges I've had. I wouldn't have had the impact that I've had if I hadn't made that decision. So I worked with Bob for a number of years after that. He wrote the foreword to my first book, and then every year since I've had coaches, sometimes the same, sometimes others, or more than one. And I don't think that you can grow to your potential without having that, right? That's a long-winded answer to your question, but I share the story because it kind of gives a foundation for it. When I wanted to start a publishing company, I phoned a gentleman that I had met. He was a publisher for one of the largest publishing houses in the United States. I was the opening keynote. He was the closing keynote at a one-day event in Dallas. And we sat in the green room for a couple hours. He was there early. My flight didn't leave until the evening. And we exchanged phone numbers. And I called him and, ultimately he said, no, I don't want to work with you. I'm retiring. This changed his mind later on. I worked with him for probably 18 months because I needed the inside scoop. So if you want to make a shift and a change, you need to have a coach. And again, this is I'm not here to sell Shawn across the board. Don't get me wrong. I want to work with amazing, wonderful, incredible people. But the point in all this is that to make those significant changes, it takes an investment of time, energy, effort, money. And I ask everybody that I get the privilege to have a conversation with, are you prepared to do anything and everything that it takes to get where you want to go, provided that it's legal, moral, and ethical? And I think you have to be able to answer yes to that question if it's going to work.
Well, I think a lot of people would think they could answer yes to that question. What I've learned over the years, and thanks for sharing that story, by the way, because it gives me some additional insights. But, we often say, we talk about, even in one of the podcasts my wife and I do together, we talk about, that segment's called Mindset Matters, but we talk about certain things. One of the things that we've talked about is, are you coachable? You're a coach, you coach people, you don't coax people. And as soon as you got to start coaxing somebody, then the game's over. Like that's not what I'm here to do. So are you coachable is such an important conversation. And most people think they are until they get told they got to do the extra set of squats, right? It's like, okay, no, you got to go do, that's where the growth is in the extra set. So these are things that we discover, but also in understanding what you just did. I mean, you were still a young man. I mean, it's not like you're an old man. You're a mere child to me, but you were a young man when you had that conversation with Bob Proctor. And
I was a young guy, yeah.
So let's just break that down. I mean, this is interesting because it's a statement of character. First off, given your background, you actually had the savvy or the balls to actually make the call to Proctor. That was the first thing that you have to pay attention to. 99 out of 100 people, or 999 out of 1,000, whatever, would not have ever even made that call. Secondly, you actually had an intelligent conversation with Bob. You met him and did what you did, and then you actually committed to something that was way over your pay grade. And as that bar was set really high, which I'm sure he did intentionally, whether that was legit or not, doesn't matter. The point is that you then took the next step and said, okay, no, I got to do this. So those are major forks in the road that you, for whatever reason, saw. You saw that fork in the road, said I had to take it. But that's actually a statement of character. Now, the reason I kind of preface that whole conversation, Shawn, is because I go back to understanding what it takes. Part of what I, around this show is, seemingly ordinary, achieving extraordinary results. Now, we go back to a kid raised in BC by a very conservative based family and frugal and, whatever that conversation is. Yet out of that came a man who is making a difference in the world on a day-to-day basis and impacting literally millions of people over these many years. So let's go back to that. Tell me a little bit about you as a kid growing up. Was your dad entrepreneurial? Was your mom entrepreneurial? What really had you come out of the chute and go, or what's the fork in the road? Where's the what drove, I want to change the world. I want to make an influence. So I don't want to go to that question yet. I want to go back to what the first question was. Tell me a little bit about where your parents. So are you, sorry to be long-winded in the question, I often am. So the question really is it nature or nurture?
That's a good question, and I'll let you and the listeners determine that outcome, and I'll share a little bit of this. I grew up in a home where my dad was definitely entrepreneurial, perhaps not in the right way. I remember very distinctly him crawling underneath a Kenworth to change oil. I was probably 12 or 13 at the time, and I said to him, why are you doing the oil change? He goes, well, the shop charges $500. And I said, well, couldn't you be doing something that paid you more than $500 for that, that period of time? And he looked at me like I had 16 heads. Mm-hmm. And I remember, my dad would never have retired. My dad was killed in a hit and run accident many, many years ago. And I remember he'd sold a couple of companies, and the only thing, by the way, people ask me, how I got involved in real estate. Well, this was part of my upbringing. I think it's in my blood. 3 weeks before my dad passed away, he went and bought a house that no one knew about. We didn't find it until probably 3 or 4 weeks after he was, he passed on. And it was just, he was going to do a rehab and flip it. And so that's where that comes from. And I grew up in that. I also remember being, a young kid, very young, preteens, and having to, be up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning because things have to happen in a certain timeline. That was my perspective of entrepreneurialism. And I didn't want that. I was determined never to be an entrepreneur. When I moved from BC to Alberta, I vowed I was not going to be an entrepreneur. And I then went and got myself a job and found that I was highly unemployable. And that sort of was, I tried it a couple times to see if I was right. And ultimately it turned out that I was. And so I've had the privilege of running and starting 44, I guess now, over the last 32 plus years. The one constant through all of that is no matter the highs and lows, there might have been about a year in there where this didn't happen, but from about age 20 I don't know, 21 or 22, I've always kind of worked. I was a coach before there was coaching. How's that? Working with small businesses. And it all started from being 13 years old. And in the back of a magazine was an ad, classified section, something about helping companies grow and succeed. And I asked my parents, those days, we didn't have the technology around banking we do today. And I asked my parents to write a check. I think it was $12 or $13 for this book. And essentially what someone had done is written a book and printed it themselves. And it was a watered down version of management consulting. But I was a 13-year-old kid, lived in rural BC. Who am I going to consult with? The cattle down the lane? It's not realistic. And I was in school. And so what really happened and how I made the money that I had to when, I worked with Bob and through a number of years was this. And I still have the book. It's actually sitting at home. And, my son asked me about it because it looks old and it's, looks like someone typed it on an old style, manual typewriter, which it probably was. But that was really sort of the beginning of this for me. So I grew up in a very entrepreneurial home, although not what we would consider to be, in today's world, efficiency or what I teach and preach and practice. And then, moved to, in those days, what I called the big city, and with full intentions of never becoming an entrepreneur. And obviously that didn't work out. And so the entrepreneurial side did, and I have, built a lot of companies, the largest of which was a management consulting firm, the largest management consulting firm in Western Canada that I sold in '07. It really, some of the fundamentals, people look at me funny when I start talking about this, especially when I'm working with companies, and they say, well, how do you know that? And sometimes I have to give it a second thought, because we go back to, when I was a kid, growing up in a family where business was, the lifeline. It was the focus, where there was always some kind of entrepreneurial venture on the plate, no matter what time of year or what season it was. And, I work with clients on this even now when it comes to, utilization of time and investment of time. Growing up in southern BC, you can appreciate that there's a time when you harvest the fruit and et cetera, et cetera. And if you miss that, you lose out on your crop. If you're in the prairies in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, it's grain for the most part. And, if the snow falls and your crop is lying flat, you're pretty much out of luck. In your business, you have times, and in your life, you have times where there are certain things that you need to be doing. And if you miss that, you have challenges in getting to that place you want to. So for me, you know what? I don't think everyone is ever going to do what Shawn's done. I think there are people out there, no matter what it is you do, even if you have a traditional job, you still have to perform. You still have to deliver a certain level of service in order to keep that job. So at some level, each and every one of us can wrap their head around what I'm saying. If you don't show up in a certain way, you're not going to be around to be of service.
When you look at, I want to go back and just touch on a bit of a question around, 40 plus businesses. That's relatively uncommon. I mean, most people are starting up businesses and then driving those businesses to grow, and they have them for many years. I'm certainly that kind of guy. What drove you to say, I'm going to build businesses and sell them? Was just a model that you had? Was that just a thought process you had? Or were they just ongoing entrepreneurial accidents and you just kept having them?
There were certainly some accidents, unintentional. Some were not. I mean, building the consulting company at the same time that I was building the eviction company in Alberta was not intentional. The consulting side was, I bought a little tiny business the guy had tried to build and it wasn't doing anything too significant, and built it to well over $100 million, $130 million in about 7 or 8 years. The other one that was not intentional, and just a couple for example's sake, was the eviction company, which, there was a point in time where, if we go back a number of years, I did a vast majority of that work for the RAIN members here in the province of Alberta.
Yeah.
Where, I had an immigrant couple come to me and say, listen, we bought a house. We didn't know what we're doing. Would you help us? And I said, that's not the kind of work I do. Like, I don't do that work. And they begged and implored. But I finally relented after about a week, and I ran into court and got a court order. And
Oh yeah, but we should give listeners a little bit of background. Aside from you're direct and you're brash, you're a big dude. So you're even a little intimidating physically, as well as just how you articulate messages.
well, I was hoping you weren't going to raise that, but all right.
Anyways, okay, yes, you can look pretty mean on any given day. That's the point of that. Okay, but you're good looking. Let's face it.
Oh, geez, thank you. I appreciate that. When I was in university, I worked in a nightclub.
Mm.
And I remember, I'd long left that stuff and was done university. And somebody took me aside one time and said to me, Shawn, you really have to smile. Mm. And I said, well, but I do smile. They're like, no, you look like a doorman who wants to kick someone's backside. And, so for a while there, I was very conscious about, the fact that I had to walk around with this Tresor cat grin on my face. You know what? I've been fortunate and blessed. I at least was 6'2" at one point in time and, did a lot of evictions in the province, but that was something that came out of one interaction. I never set out to say, I want to own that company. But, after I did that one file for somebody, all of a sudden I literally had a lineup down the hallway of the office with folks from that community because I'd been referred from inside of the community, and it grew into something that was very significant by the time I sold it. The intention was never to build companies and sell. Honestly, that never crossed my mind until it started to happen, and only really happened because as I built multiple companies at the same time, they all kind of got to a place where I couldn't do it all. And the only one that I really, I guess two that I really hung on to was the consulting company until 2007, and then the eviction company as well, where I had folks working for me that handled, a vast majority of the operation. The coaching side was interesting because it started working with small business people, helping them from a structure standpoint and some of the more transactional aspects. And as I started to understand and matured, myself personally, and understand how we as human beings operate, think, function, certainly some of the approaches changed to that. But would I continue to do it? Yeah, at some point, I'm sort of that individual that if I see an opportunity, I want to take advantage of it. And so being able to do that in a way where, I guess one thing I'm aware of is that, if you take on too much, you accomplish nothing. Mm-hmm. If you're spread too thin. So, even with the publishing company, that company I put that on the back burner for probably 3.5 or 4 years till I had the knowledge and till I had, some folks on the team to help me with that because it would have negatively, impacted the other things I was doing at that point in time. Building companies can be interesting and challenging, and building companies isn't for everyone because there's a certain amount of, as from your own experiences, there's always a risk involved with building a company. Mm-hmm. I'm one of those individuals that whether this is right or wrong, I tend to be able to perform or dance very well when there's a gun pointed at me. And, maybe that is hereditary. Maybe that's learned. I'm not sure. But, and when you encounter a challenge, I'm always, my wife tells me this too. I should stop trying to fix everything, or everyone. But there's always a solution to every problem.
Well, let's back up to the comment that your wife makes around you trying to fix everyone. I mean, I know where it's that comment. I understand what's behind it, but aside from the money, the dollars and cents side of gaining, what drives you in terms of your coaching? What have you become aware of over the years of? Why is it you coach? Why is it that you publish books? If you take money off the table, what's behind it for you?
A good question, and one I think that probably most people don't even think about. If I'm being honest, I really don't need to do one-on-one coaching anymore. I've been very blessed and fortunate in my life, and I'm forever grateful for that. So that aspect of it is not about the money. We live in a world where most people today don't follow through with what they talk about or perhaps even commit to without a pinch in the pocketbook. But yeah, I don't need to. I do it because I honestly love the transformation. I love working with individuals, and I'm very selective about who I work with. Not because I certainly don't think I'm better than anyone else, but I want to be able to work with the individuals that feel that they are going to actually follow through. And, the term I use, and you heard it before, follow through and follow up. Most people today want something but aren't willing to do what it takes. And so, the transformation that I get the privilege to watch is definitely a big part of the motivation. There is no question in my mind whatsoever. When you see somebody who changes whatever it is, from a financial standpoint, from a process, systems, procedure, efficiency, productivity in the organization, if it's a company, even watching relationships improve, because once someone's perspective shifts fairly dramatically, you start to see shifts and changes that are very noticeable, external to them. I think that's a big part of this. The other side of the coin is on the book side, and I alluded to this earlier when we were talking about books, is when I'm dead and gone, and I'm not looking forward to that anytime soon, but when I'm dead and gone, that material stays out there forever, and I think back, and not that I'm equating myself to someone like Napoleon Hill, whether you like or dislike, his books, but, Think and Grow Rich has impacted millions of people. I've been told, and I've not verified this, but I've been told that, as far as number of books in circulation that were printed, it's second only to the Bible. That's a pretty significant number out there. Now, again, I'm not saying I'm Napoleon Hill, but the fact that you have that type of, opportunity to share that information that does have a positive impact to change lives, that's a big part of why I've decided to that. Yes, I would be remiss and leaving this out if I didn't say the book is a massive credibility tool. My business changed dramatically when the first book came out. When we launched a couple of years ago, the Freedom Journal, which was a beautiful hardcover book, all about, the achievement and productivity side of things. I think we had to do 3 prints of that because it sold so fast. And again, the same thing was, did I need to actually do that book? No, or that journal? No. I honestly, and with humility, I did not have to. But the impact it's had, the number of people that have benefited from it and shared it with me has been outstanding. And the same with the one that came out this year. The Freedom Journal that came out this year. It's a little smaller, a little more compact. It's something that we had heard from folks they wanted, and it's a different system that I put together over the course of a couple of years. Has had a dramatic impact. I think we're well over 147,000 copies sold between January or December of last year and now.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack that book a little bit. Tell me a little bit about the Freedom Journal, because I'm not familiar with it, and I'd like to understand it, because as soon as you attach journal to it, I'm kind of connected to it because I do journal. So I'm not suggesting that's what it is, but I'm sure there's some connotation or aspect of that. So give me a little bit about your Freedom Journal.
Yeah, the Freedom Journal was something that came out of requests that I'd received for a number of years, and we did the larger hardcover book a couple of years back, and we got a lot of positive from that. We also got some people that were part of, I guess, my tribe over the number of years that had purchased it and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing this?" I said, "Well, incidentally, that's something I'm working on, but how about you share?" And so we actually went out to some folks that, a few hundred folks that are part of the community, and got their input into this. So the planner or journal is very much around individuals who are like you and myself, who know that you can accomplish more if you actually are able to put it down. And it's a plan that you follow through on a daily basis. And you're always going to have things that come up unexpected, things that are deferred, things you're waiting for. But what most people do is they don't have any kind of a plan or thought process behind their day. And the average person today, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, is you get up, you go to work, and you come home. But on the entrepreneurial side, the challenge that arises, and you've probably seen this, where someone gets up and the first thing they do is put fires out, because whatever they whether intentional or not, whatever they procrastinated on the day before, 2 days, 3 days, for a week, a month, a year, whatever it is, now their whole life is consumed with putting out fires. Whatever is important to them, in addition to that, whatever is important that has to happen gets relegated to the far corner of the desk, the back of the truck, the van, whatever it is they do. And they don't address those things that are the imperative steps they need to take until they become problems or fires, as we said. And so this really addresses that. Procrastination is just a tool in the toolbox, the idea that we don't want to do something because it's difficult is just a tool in the toolbox of procrastination. Perfection is a tool in the toolbox of procrastination. And what this little book and the system behind it is really meant to hold us accountable, have us, invest the time, not a lot, maybe 15 minutes a day at tops, to be able to journal this and put it down. And there's only so many lines on that one page. But also then it gives you the opportunity for what you're grateful for, what you did accomplish, what you didn't accomplish for a whole bunch of reasons, whatever they are, what was deferred. We had one guy that owns a very large, he's in Vancouver, actually, a very large mechanical shop, or shops, plural, on the Lower Mainland. And he's using this and he raves about it because he says, listen, he says, I can't control everything. I can't control what goes on daily with other people. He said, but I can put it down, I can defer it to a specific date, and I can revisit it so it doesn't get left behind. So there's a lot of that. If we start to understand human nature a little bit, and I'm very fortunate, I probably understand, this much out of God knows how much is out there, how that 6 inches between the ears work. When we start to realize that sometimes it's us that stands in our own way of the progress that we need, want, desire, and ultimately, I think, deserve. This is one of the ways you start to achieve at a different level. And you start to see the outcomes or the returns from those shifts and changes.
Well, I guess one could argue that we're the only thing that's ever in our way, but that's a different conversation, perhaps. But let's go back. I want to kind of touch base on why you do what you do, money aside. Your point being that you don't need to work one-on-one, but you do. There's things that you do within your business that you don't really need to do. You're not doing it for financial reasons. You're doing it because perhaps you love to do it. You like to see the change. You like to be able to experience somebody progressing and being able to be a contribution. So there's three words that always come to me from a coaching point of view, a business point of view, and that is, are you being a contribution? Because money aside, you could be making a lot of money, but if you're not feeling like you're being a contribution, and I just had a conversation not that long ago with a government auditor, and although they were making great dough, they didn't feel like they were being a contribution, and they were just hating life. So my point is that contribution.
I might agree with them.
That's contribution, right? The next thing is, fulfillment, because if you're not being a contribution, you never get the opportunity to have that sense of fulfillment in doing what you do, given how much we work and how much time we put into it. And of course, you get to be a contribution and feel that fulfillment, given that you're going to see the progress of your clients. So that's the next word that really resonates for me in this journey. And the last one, which was interesting because you talked about your book and the legacy that it leaves, but the third one, this is a human need. And actually all of these are human needs from my perspective and my learning, and that is significance. If we don't have significance, then we get shut down. And ultimately, the significance for you lives on in your book. The significance that you have is the contribution you get to be and the difference you get to make in other people's lives. So I share that only for our listeners because I know that whether you articulated it or not, and we could have got around to it, but I know that's where you come from. And I think it's an important thing for people to understand that, because the next question I'm going to get to, and you may not have an answer for this, but I want to talk about success. And, you talked about it earlier on in this conversation. You mentioned it with your clients. And, some people define success as how much money they make. To me, that's a scorecard. And, that's just one part. That's a scorecard. So, but do you have a definition for success? And I'm not putting pressure on you to have one. I'm just curious.
I think there's a vast difference between success and significance that you alluded to a moment ago. Success, by most standards could be, well, I've got so much money in the bank. That was my goal, was my objective. I have, the home I want. I have the cars I want, these types of things. And I think that's how most people view it. I would suggest, based on my own experience, significance is a whole different ballgame. And I'll address, the description here in a minute of success, your question. But I want to touch on this. Significance, I think, is, from my humble perspective, is where you're able to do those things you want to do in order to affect change that people want in their lives. And significance is the ability to do that without the financial component being a necessity. Because I think when we're in a place where we're I met with a coach one time. I stepped off a stage. It was down in Reno. I was the opening keynote for a 4-day event. And all this guy thought he was going to do at the event was close coaching. And he walked around this room. There were 1,700 people, give or take, in the room. And all he did was walk around the room and try and close people. And by the time 4 days was over, nobody wanted to talk to him. He hadn't closed anybody. And, it's interesting. We think about things from our own perspective. If you're focused very much on you you're not going to do what it is you think you want to do. If you're focused on the ability to serve, support others, you're going to have a whole different level of success. I'm not going to tell you that I'm God, or that I've ever faltered, or that I am always altruistic in my approach, but certainly that's an overarching focus of mine. From success, the recording that came out, I think it was 1959, "The Strangest Secret." Earl Nightingale, he says
Yeah.
the definition of success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. I don't know that you ever actually achieve success, having utilized that. And you've heard that obviously before. I subscribe to that very simply because I think it is about the journey. The destination, if you're not learning and if you're not growing throughout your entire life, you're dying. And that may be a harsh statement for some, but I do believe that. Do I think I've achieved success? No, I don't think I've achieved success. I think I have been able to help others get to a place where they experience a life they want, need, desire, and deserve. And for me, that certainly is a representative of some level of success. But, I learn every day, and I have the privilege to learn from the amazing, incredible people I have the privilege to work with. And, when I do shows like this and I get to speak to folks all over, whether it's from stage or whether it's radio or television or podcast, one of the interesting sides of this is usually I'll get people that will reach out to me afterwards and ask questions. And, at the end of the day, it's being able to add value to their lives as well.
It's actually, when I ask the question, I actually don't ask that question. I quit asking the question of success. I bring it up in discussion because of who you are and what you do in the world. But I did have an interesting definition passed on to me not that long ago, and with another coach, by the way. And I said, so how do you define success? How would you define success? And he was very quick to answer it. And he said, I define success as, if I can say yes to, am I living the vision for my life? And something, if I'm living the vision for my life, then I'm successful. And that vision is always changing. It changes week to week, month to month, year to year. It's just we're growing and we're going. So if you're living that vision, then it's got nothing to do with money, because money could actually not be the vision for your life. It may be something that you live a very meager, humble life, yet you're living your vision. Therefore, you can hold yourself as successful. So it was a really interesting kind of play on the term success. And because we really get into it, I know I do and that's why I quit asking the question, is just that how the hell do you define it? But of all the definitions, I think that was the best definition I'd heard in a very, very long time. And it really spoke to me at the time. And I'll say this one other thing, is because he said the other thing that he said was, I asked him about at the end of the podcast, I always ask my guests, what are you grateful for? And his answer was thoughtful. And he said, I'm grateful for all the things that I have to be grateful about. And I went, that's the best freaking answer I've ever heard. So that was awesome. So I wanted to share that with you for no other reason than they were kind of cool definitions. And they kind of speak to all of what we've talked about, even in this little segment of the show.
I really honestly believe this. If you live your life in a way and you operate your businesses in a way, and I say businesses because I'm that guy that has, my hands in more than one pie at the same time usually, but yes, we need to make money. Money is not an evil thing. Money is a tool. And I remember stepping off a stage, and I was in what we would consider the Bible Belt of the United States. And I had this woman come up to me and say, that she's a very strong believer and a woman of faith, and that money is the root of all evil.
Sure.
And I said to her, I said, well, that's actually not what it says. I says, the love of money is what it says is the root of all evil. Money's a tool. If you frame houses and you show up on a job site and you don't have the tools in your truck, you're pretty much useless as a framer. Mm-hmm. Money is just a tool, right? That's really what it boils down to. And I think once we understand that in today's world, in today's society, you have to have a certain amount of money for the lifestyle you want, and to be able to give back to those people that, you want to share with, or that you love and support. And I think that's a key. So I'm not discounting money by any stretch of the imagination. I think we all need it. But I think if we approach this from a different angle, instead of what I want, and how can I serve and support? What can I give from an altruistic standpoint? I'm not saying that if you operate a retail store, you shouldn't have prices and you should just let people walk out. I'm not saying that, but I think there's a different way of serving that changes the dynamic of any kind of a business relationship, whether it's it's a couple seconds long inside of a retail environment, or there's a much longer sales cycle, for different types of businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a of course, when we look at it, I often think that I'm only looking at it through a set of eyes called entrepreneur, called business. But, there's a whole other kind of world out there called people with careers and jobs, and how do they seek that fulfillment? How do they form a definition for success for themselves, given there may be limitations within the environment that they have and or the framework that they are? At the end of the day, they still have to be able to, arrive somewhere and or achieve some goal or some outcome that lights them up and makes them feel better for what they've done, the time they've put in, perhaps. And of course, we can go down that whole rabbit hole of different conversations of what people do or not do. But anyways, that's
I'll share my answer. You haven't asked me yet, but I'll share the answer. And I've said this before. If I've been able to positively impact one life, it was all worthwhile. Now, I think I've probably exceeded that, and I'm grateful for that. As years have gone by, that has, I've sort of added to that as well, because I've been fortunate enough to have two incredible kids. And I'm in, from an age perspective, if you'd have told me, 20 years ago, I'd have, a 5 and 11-year-old at this age of my life, I probably would have laughed at you. But the success also translates to kids, and this being a dad, and I think you're also a grandfather now, if I remember correctly.
I am.
And so at the end of the day, I think there's a certain level of whatever the definition is around success that plays into that, and how, you're able to impact the lives of those who you have, especially children, a significant influence over.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Well, Shawn, we could go on a long time, but I should wind this down. I appreciate your time, by the way, and great conversation. Love it. As I wind down, I like to kind of do some what we refer to as rapid fire questions that aren't quite so rapid fire, but they're fun to just kind of walk through, and we'll see how you do on these, and then we'll part ways. But I really do appreciate some of the insights or many of the insights that you've shared today. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Okay, so let's just wrap it up with some of these questions. This one isn't all that rapid fire, but I'm curious for you. You've got your success. What did you call it? Sorry, I lost the journal. The name of your journal, Freedom Journal, and so that's part of a routine, I'm assuming, for you in your day somewhere. Do you have a morning or an evening routine? What kind of discipline do you have around physical, mental, spiritual? In terms of a routine, a practice, if you will?
Specifically with, so I'm a morning guy. Typically, I'm up by 5 in the morning. I mean, there are rare exceptions to that rule, but typically up by 5 o'clock in the morning. And I have routines on all fronts, whether it's from a journaling standpoint outside of even what we were talking about a moment ago, from a physical standpoint, obviously, I think that's important. But also, when it comes to relationships, so, with my wife as well. So there's definitely morning guy. As far as, we talked about the journal or the planner. One of the things that I do is both morning and evening take about 5, 6, 7 minutes and invest that time, into that, both morning and evening, on average. I mean, certainly there's the odd times you're traveling, that kind of thing. And I do a fair bit of that where I don't, especially if it's, for pleasure. But, I would say 300 days out of 365, I probably spend about 15 minutes, just putting pen to paper and, allowing the thoughts and ideas to flow, as well as the accountability.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Is that if you don't ever take that time, because it really creates the focus for you, right? Like most people don't seem to think in those terms, that they really take the time to be present to what am I going to get done and what am I going to do and those kinds of things. More to your point about firefighting or being reactive. Okay, now this is going to be a tough question for you, I'm sure. Aside from your book, do you have a favorite book that you gift, had a big impact on your life? Something that really stands out for you?
Yeah, it is a tough question because I think there's a whole bunch more than one. The ones that come to mind, definitely, I would go probably to Think and Grow Rich, which I alluded to earlier in the conversation. Certainly, I've probably read that book 40 times. There's a lot out there. There's a book called, you may have read this, by Price Pritchett, a book called U Squared. It's 34 pages. I order them by the case and give them to all of our clients.
Oh, cool.
If you haven't yet, get a copy. So that it's YOU and then the 2 for squared, U2, U Squared.
I've seen the book, but I have not read it. Interesting.
Yeah, it honestly will take you mere minutes. Price Pritchett, Dr. Price Pritchett out of Texas, is the author. He's written a ton of stuff. This book, I've probably given away, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 copies over the years, and
Wow.
recommended it many more times.
Yeah.
I carry a copy with me in my briefcase. It is undoubtedly probably in the top 3 for me, anyway.
Cool. iPhone or Android?
Android.
Oh, you're an Android guy. Ah, finally,
Yes.
an Android guy. I'm not anymore, by the way. They put so much pressure on me. I was shamed into going to iPhone.
The amount of pressure I get from my staff, from my family, including my kids. But yes, it's still an Android.
Oh boy. Okay.
I did break down and buy a Mac though, even though it's sitting at home.
Yeah. Well, something. I did that first too, and then I finally went to the phone. Okay. Do you have a favorite inspirational quote?
Yeah, and this is probably equally as hard as the question around books.
Of course.
I think it's the probably Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or can't, either way, you're right.
Yep. Favorite swear word?
I endeavor to have none.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Gosh, you're okay. Fine. Listen, I have had people that, guess, because I'm not that guy. I have lots of favorite swear words. And, but I have had guests that have said, yeah, no, I don't swear. What?
Well, I'll never say that. I'm I'm not going to stand on that pedestal at all. I was doing something at our summer place and I cracked my head. This is about 2 weeks ago. And I know for a fact the word that came out of my mouth was anything but child friendly.
Yeah.
And my 11-year-old looked at me and he's like, Dad, I should wash your mouth out with soap. And I'm like, oh, yes.
That's funny.
So I'll say this. Yeah, I rarely will I. Very rare.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Room, your desk, or your car. What do you clean first?
Definitely the car.
Okay. Favorite tune? Do you have one, or favorite?
Much to the chagrin of my wife.
Favorite tune or favorite band? Do you have one?
I don't know. I don't have a favorite band. I think I probably would extend that question if you allow me the latitude and say genre. And I would, I like rock and roll, some of the older stuff. I'm born and raised in Western Canada, so I'll say country music.
Oh, there you go. It was interesting. I was going through some music this weekend. It was my wife's birthday, a milestone birthday. We had a party, and I was kind of looking at playlists, and I got into my old playlist, and I came across a book an album by Ray Charles called My World. And there isn't a tune on that album that I don't like. And it's Ray Charles' My World. And you know something? I recommended that album to so many people. Nobody can find it, yet I have it. So if you find it, folks, download it. It's a great album. Okay. Favorite movie? Do you have one? Okay, I'm going to give you what most dads answer, whatever the kids are watching.
Yeah, you know what? I don't. This is really sad. I don't watch much movies, whether it's theater or TV. I don't think it's probably been 3 years since I've actually gone to a theater and seen a movie. I don't want to say adult movie because that makes it sound, but something that isn't animated.
Yes, got it. And final question: what are you grateful for today, Shawn?
Well, this is a great after you gave me what your prior guest said.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll say this. Every single thing in my life is there by intention, mine or a higher power, in my humble opinion, and that's my belief system. I am in a place where most people probably only dream of being. I'm healthy. I have 2 incredibly healthy kids. I have a beautiful wife, and I get to do those things that I think are important to me and to them. And I think the idea that I can do that by serving others in the way I do is what ultimately it comes down to, and that's what I'm grateful for.
Fantastic. And I am grateful for having you and connecting with you. And thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. If you found value in the podcast, please take the time to rate and review and share with others. Share with your friends. As it is my goal to always improve and to provide the highest value for you, the listener. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions you'd like answered, please email me at ceo@reincanada.com. That's ceo@reincanada.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, Patrick out.